Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating historical mystery. And the crazy part is, it's been hiding right in plain sight. We're talking about the invisible energy plant, the sabotage of Yaupon holly. This isn't just some dry botany lesson, okay? We're diving into a biological superpower, a plant native to North America that was literally systematically erased from our daily lives. It's a true story packed with global empires, corporate sabotage, and this incredible source of human energy that honestly, most of us walk right past every single day without even knowing its name.
So let me just ask you, what exactly is growing in your local parking lot? Seriously, if you live anywhere in the American Southeast, you might want to take a much closer look next time you're out. Think about those perfectly trimmed green hedges you see everywhere. Lining the highways in North Carolina, outside shopping malls in Texas, or tucked into subdivisions from Richmond down to Houston. Landscape crews maintain them, people prune them in their front yards, they survive massive droughts without a problem, but nobody ever stops to ask, hey, what actually are these? Well, it's called Yaupon holly. And here's the kicker. It is the only caffeinated plant native to the entire North American continent. And as we're going to see, it's just been sitting there, waiting quietly in your neighbor's yard to be rediscovered.
Okay, let's talk about the number 4. Think about your morning cup of coffee. Your standard coffee relies on exactly one major energy compound to get you going, right? Caffeine. Just the one. But this Native American plant, Yaupon holly, it has exactly 4 distinct energy compounds. And they aren't just a random mix of chemicals, they were essentially engineered by evolution to work together in perfect natural synchrony.
The chemistry happening here is absolutely brilliant. It's like a perfectly tuned engine. First up, you have the caffeine. That's your spark. It lights the engine. But then, compound number 2, theobromine, steps in. This one acts to smooth out the curve and hold your energy wide open. While that's happening, the third compound, theophylline, is actively expanding your airways, pumping oxygen into your blood and muscle tissue. And finally, you get theocrine, which extends the whole duration of this energy. It keeps you going not until a crash forces you to stop, but until you are actually ready to wind down.
To really wrap our heads around how unique this is, let's compare it to what we usually drink. Coffee. Well, coffee is a sprinter. It hits your bloodstream in about 30 minutes, spikes really hard, and then, boom, the floor drops out. Every coffee drinker knows that dreaded 2-hour mark, right? The crash, the headache, that desperate reach for cup number 2. Yaupon, though, is more like a relay race. The theobromine takes about 2 to 3 hours to reach its peak concentration in your body. So right at the exact moment the caffeine starts to dip, the theobromine is still rising up to catch the baton. There's no floor falling out, just a smooth, optimized handoff for sustained endurance. And beyond just the energy, there is one massive difference that separates Yaupon from coffee or your standard black and green teas: tannins. Tannins are those pesky compounds that give you that bitter taste, the stinging feeling in your stomach lining, the acid reflux, and for some people, that anxious, jittery edge from caffeine. Well, Yaupon has essentially 0 tannins, literally 0 bitterness, 0 digestive sting. You actually cannot oversteep this stuff or make it taste acrid, so you can finally say goodbye to that awful chalky taste when you accidentally leave a tea bag in your mug for too long. Chemically speaking, it is the gentlest delivery system for caffeinated energy that exists in nature. Now, we are definitely not the first people to figure this out. Looking at the historical timeline, archaeologists digging at places like Windover Pond in Florida have actually found purpose-built shell cups containing the exact chemical signature of Yaupon, and those date back 8,000 years. That's thousands of years before tea even showed up in China. By the 1500s, Spanish explorers found it and called it the black drink. Jump to the 1700s, and it was booming as a major colonial export called Carolina tea. Then, out of nowhere, there's a sudden act of sabotage in 1789 by a guy named William Ayton, followed by a brief little revival during the Civil War, and finally, right now, a massive commercial comeback in 2025. Let's rewind and look a bit closer at that ancient history. Because for indigenous tribes across the American Southeast, like the Cherokee, the Creek, and the Timucua, Yaupon wasn't just some novelty beverage or an afternoon treat, it was quite literally essential infrastructure. Across thousands of miles of territory, these groups relied heavily on this specific plant for sustained, clean energy. Warriors would carry dried Yaupon leaves on long journeys, specifically because it made them less susceptible to thirst and exhaustion. And the best part? It didn't make them jittery or reckless. It just naturally prevented the everyday fatigue and hunger that usually stops human beings in their tracks.
So, if this stuff was so incredible, what on earth happened? Why aren't we all drinking it? Well, by the early 1700s, colonial traders were shipping Yaupon over to Europe, and it was making real money. And that is exactly when the British East India Company took notice. In 1783, a German botanist named Johann David Schott wrote in his journal that importing Yaupon into England was being heavily restricted. Why? Well, his exact words were, "lest the sale of Chinese tea should be diminished." This had absolutely nothing to do with science or health. Chinese tea was the foundational commodity of the British East India Company's entire global empire, and suddenly that empire was being threatened by a random shrub growing for free in the American South. And as we know, empires do not like to compete. They eliminate. And they found a brilliant, really insidious way to eliminate Yaupon. Enter William Ayton in 1789. He was a Scottish botanist, the royal gardener to King George III, and highly connected to the East India Company. He published a revised botanical catalog. Now, Ayton had never set foot in America. He'd never even brewed a cup of Yaupon, but he had read accounts of specific Native American purification ceremonies where men would drink massive, excessive quantities of scalding hot Yaupon on an empty stomach for the very specific ritual purpose of fasting and purging. Ayton conveniently stripped away all that ceremonial context and slapped this gentle, everyday plant with a brand new Latin name, Ilex vomitoria, the holly that makes you vomit. It was a complete lie. Drinking a normal cup of Yaupon no more makes you sick than a normal cup of coffee does. But let me tell you, the psychological sabotage worked flawlessly.
With just that one fake name, centuries of potential were instantly wiped out. I mean, people read the label and just walked the other way. The plant essentially vanished from global trade overnight. It did make a very brief comeback during the American Civil War when Union naval blockades cut the South off from imported coffee and tea. Soldiers and civilians started drinking it again, calling it Carolina tea just to get through the siege. But the second the war ended, Yaupon was abandoned all over again. It got associated with defeat, blockades, and the bitter feeling of scarcity. Once coffee started flowing freely again, everyone just turned their backs on this incredible native plant. It didn't just become forgotten, it became entirely invisible.
And that brings us to the massive cognitive dissonance we have today. Look at these modern figures. Right now, the United States imports roughly 3.5 billion pounds of coffee and 250,000 tons of tea every single year. Every last ounce of that relies on complex overseas supply chains, wildly volatile commodity markets, and massive cargo ships crossing the oceans. And our imported Yaupon? Exactly zero. It is actually crazy to think that we spend billions upon billions of dollars shipping caffeine across the globe, all while a vastly superior alternative is literally sitting completely untouched in our own local parking lots.
And that is exactly why Yaupon is suddenly so incredibly relevant right now. It is the ultimate sustainable crop. Think about it. It evolved specifically for North American soil, under this specific sun. Once a plant is established, it needs absolutely no pesticides, no chemical fertilizers, and zero irrigation. It doesn't drain our aquifers, and 100% does not require a massive cargo ship burning fossil fuels across 3 oceans just to get to your kitchen. It is naturally resilient, incredibly self-sufficient, and honestly, a huge reason for optimism when we look at the future of farming.
Which is why things are finally starting to shift. The 2025 commercial comeback is real. Over the past 5 years, we've seen farmers, herbalists, and entrepreneurs in states like Texas, Florida, and North Carolina start harvesting Yaupon commercially again. And just recently, agricultural economists over at Cornell University noted that Yaupon is finally gaining genuine commercial momentum. With rising tariffs on imported coffee and tea, having a domestic source of caffeine is suddenly a huge market advantage. The amazing little plant that the British Empire tried to bury with a fake, gross Latin name is finally getting a name worth saying out loud again.
So, I leave you with this one question. Will you ever look at a random green hedge the same way again? For centuries, the machine of history tried its absolute best to erase this plant, to turn it into nothing more than neat little green rectangles outside of our subdivisions. But now you know exactly what you are looking at. It isn't just a decoration. It's definitely not a weed. It is thousands of years of human energy, just waiting to be rediscovered. Next time you walk past one, remember the incredible history that is quite literally growing right in front of you. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.